Welcome back to the Many Figures of, the show in which we go over the action figure history of various Transformers characters. And at long last, it's time we look at our very first piece of a combiner, that being a Breakdown, representing the Stunticons and Menasor. I want to give a big thank you to Pultastic, Brick Gaming 4264, Ghost Rider 07YL, and Grim Prime 6451 for all suggesting Breakdown. For anyone who does not know, Breakdown is one of the Stunticons out of G1, a team of car Decepticons that were meant to counter the Autobots' road supremacy. Alongside that, he would have been a component to Menasor. Breakdown, alongside all the other Stunticons, were all depicted as being unwell, shall we say. Breakdown was paranoid, and was prone to panicking at the slightest provocation. But that's enough talking about characters. Let's actually look at some of those toys he's had over the years. Breakdown's very first toy would have been released in 1986. This little guy would have been just barely taller than the Autobot Minibots, just like the other combiner limbs. He turns into a Lamborghini, effectively making him a smaller sideswipe in some ways. His proportions in robot mode are alright. It was literally just so we can get him as an arm or a leg for Menasor. Overall, I think he looks good. It's just a shame that he made sacrifices for a combined mode that probably is not the best. You could have gotten this same figure the same year within the Menasor gift set that would have given you all the Stunticons at once. In 1990, you could have gotten yet another unchanged Breakdown within the European and Australian Hasbro markets as a Classics reissue. Breakdown's second major toy came out in 1994. Well, I say came out. G2 Breakdown did eventually get released in BotCon, but he's famous as being one of the most prolific canceled toys of all time. Even though they have already released the G2 Aerial Bots, and the G2 Stunticons were ready to be shipped out alongside the G2 Protectobots, they were ultimately canceled. Breakdown is the only one that became truly attainable, and that was only if you went to BotCon 94. 204 of these guys at BotCon, 300 in the world in general. If you have this Breakdown, consider yourself very lucky. Keeping with BotCon, in 2004 you could have gotten an Action Master G2 Breakdown. Now this is what you could call a bootleg. It's a heavily modified Action Master sideswipe, and there were only a few hundred of them made for the convention. It's technically not an official BotCon toy because this was before Hasbro made them the official Transformers convention, but it is an interesting side note in Breakdown's toy history. In 2005, we had our first proper reinvention of Breakdown. He was now a somewhat ornery old man from the planet Velocitron, an Autobot codger who was willing to stand up against Ransack, Crumplezone, and Dirt Boss. The figure looks really nice actually. I know he has a very odd handle, it looks like you could pick him up by his back, but I love the wheels on his shoulders, the arms look okay even if they're a touch weedy, and he has good athletic legs. He definitely looks like he's from the same planet as Crumplezone and Ransack. They all have such a similar aesthetic about them. His proportions really do lend him some good character, and even though the colors aren't the best, at the very least they're unique to him. If you had popped into a Walmart in 2006, you could have gone a Leader Class Optimus Prime with Breakdown as a bonus. That's kind of fun. Also in 2006, you could have gone Breakdown GTS. This is my favorite colors ever put on this mold. It actually makes him look more like G1 Cup. In 2007, the original Breakdown was re-released in the Universe line. You would have found these guys at KB Toy Works. And eventually in 2008, there would have been another re-release, also in Universe. It's really funny to think that if you were to just stop at 2008, there were more Cybertron breakdowns than G1 breakdowns out. It seems like this could have been a character that could have become more associated with his Cybertron characterization than his G1 characterization. But I think BotCon had other plans. In 2010, there was the Timelines Generation 2 Redux breakdown. This was taking the Universe Sideswipe and Sunstreaker mold and turning it into G2 Breakdown. The colors look so beautiful on this mold. It was already one of the best Transformer figures of that time, and now he's just a little bit more vibrant and poppy. I love the bubblegum pink and the very neon bluish green. It's such a good garish deco. There's also the fun little detail that with this figure, it means that BotCon released 3 separate G2 breakdowns, which is kind of wild to me. Also in 2010, you could have gotten the Revenge of the Fallen Scout class breakdown. So now, Breakdown is back at proper mass retail too. Sure, he's essentially just a repaint, but it doesn't change the fact that this was the G1 colors and the G1 name and the G1 character. He was a coward on the run from the Autobots, prone to constant stress. It's just Breakdown. Breakdown was back to BotCon the very next year, because in 2011 he was in the Stunticon Job box set. This was the animated version of all the stunticons. Breakdown here was using the Rodimus mold, meaning that you got the incredible transformation, the beautiful car mode, and the highly articulated robot mode of Rodimus, now in the creamy colors of Breakdown. This is a very good looking figure, and would have been a part of one of the best box sets ever put out by BotCon. In 2012, Breakdown came back in the biggest way yet. He was reintroduced in Transformers Prime as the partner to Knockout. And even though you may look at this Breakdown and not see much of the old boy, look at that head of his. The crest, the red face, the yellow eyes. Yeah, this Breakdown takes a lot more from the original than you might think in terms of the design. And even in terms of the character, even if this Breakdown wasn't exactly a paranoid coward, there was a certain gentleness to him, a certain pitiable factor. Whereas you felt bad for the original Breakdown due to how scared he was, you felt bad for this Breakdown because of how honorable he was. In 2012, you were able to get the Cyberverse Legion Breakdown. This is a good Legion figure, but he's noticeably smaller than every other figure in the line, including RC, Bumblebee, and the Viacons. Really, he should have been a Commander class figure similar to Bulkhead or Optimus. Instead, he was given this very tiny little guy. And for a long time, this was the only Breakdown mold released in the United States. You see, over in Japan in the ARMS Micron line, you could have gotten the War Breakdown figure. This is a good, bulky Voyager. Yeah, he's still a bit shorter than Bulkhead, but at least he has a good weight and heft behind him. His hand turns into a hammer, the design is all on point, the truck mode looks great. This Breakdown is honestly one of the best figures from Prime, especially when it comes to getting that on-screen model into plastic form. It makes it so strange that it was never released over here. Officially, it's because the figure was not big enough to be a proper Voyager, but not small enough to be a deluxe either. So instead of putting in a smaller figure or putting in more accessories to help bulk out the price, they just never brought him over. Staying in Japan, you actually could have gotten the Cyberverse Breakdown there as well, with more paint that made him more accurate to the cartoon. He would have been in the Decepticon Easy collection, alongside of Viacon, Knockout, Starscream, Megatron, and Terrorcon Cliffjumper. Bringing 2012 to a close, you'd be able to go to a McDonald's and get a non-transforming SUV breakdown in a Happy Meal. We've covered a lot of breakdowns so far, and it's only going to ramp up from here. But before we go into that, why don't we take a quick break and look at third party? The first third party breakdown I would have ever known about would have been the Fans Project Car Crash, which would have been a part of their Casualty set. The Menasor here looks really cool. As for the robots, they're all so interesting. They look like a cross between the movies and IDW designs. I love all 5 of the team here, and even though I think that Breakdown's one of the weaker designs, he still has such a cool look. His leg transformation is really fun, his arms are blocky, his torso is a bit weedy, but I think that works considering he's supposed to be such a wimp of a character. So much of that sentiment continues into the Transformission Carnage. Now, this was getting to a little bit closer of Masterpiece scale, sure, but the style was still completely their own. This breakdown was just trying to modernize the design, give him a new Lamborghini mode, make his robot mode look a little bit more like we were seeing out of Universe and IDW at the time. I love how they do the legs, I love how the wheels hang out above his shoulders, how the torso comes together makes him look so swift. Of course, people and interests change. Eventually, we start getting to the masterpieces that needed to look just like the cartoon. And you can look at the DX9 Montana as one of the first of that type. This breakdown is gorgeous, don't get me wrong, but there's tiny annoyances here. The pelvic flap needs to get out of the way for the legs to articulate, but it can be a bit stiff, and the proportions are a bit wonky. DX9 often give you good robots, but transformations are often very difficult and the materials are easy to damage. Breakdown, unfortunately, is just like the other figures from DX9 in that regard. It's a good figure with good ideas, but there's also a lot of small issues that linger. There's actually not been that many attempts at a Masterpiece Breakdown. The only other one is the Fans Toys Spoiler. And of course, this is a beautiful looking figure. If it's from Fans Toys, it's always going to be beautiful. The figure is covered from head to toe in paint, his proportions are on point, it looks just like he stepped out of the TV screen. When you buy from Fans Toys, you are getting the most accurate version of this robot and this car mode possible. But you're also getting a figure that is susceptible to paint damage and often has a very rough transformation. It's just the reality of trying to make a figure like this. Why don't we talk a little bit of Legends? Those are always a little bit more my pace. Now, so far, Iron Factory and New Age have not made Menasors, but Magic Square has, and I love how their breakdown turned out. His proportions are so slick. I love how his big shoulders very gently go down into that very small waist. I love his colors. I love that he comes with Wild Rider. What a great duo that is. I like the colors, I like the gun, I like the combine mode. But, on that note, why don't we get back to Hasbro and Takara proper in the year 2013. In 2013, you'd be able to go into McDonald's again and get a different Happy Meal breakdown. If you were a fan of Bionicle, you might like to try out Hasbro's attempt to recreate it with ConstructBots. If you want to, you could also pick up the Apex Armor with breakdown. So this little green breakdown was just a redeco of the original Cyberverse mold, but it seems like Hasbro took the wrong lesson when we were complaining about not getting that bigger breakdown, because they gave this guy Apex Hunter Armor, making him a massive, massive figure. Popping back over to G1, the bot shots were still alive and well in 2013, and you'd be able to pick up a breakdown alongside the rest of the stunticons. However, the single most prolific figure breakdown received in 2013 came from the Transformers Collectors Club, in which we got G1 Breakdown. This was a redeco of the G2 Breakdown from a few years earlier, still using that Universe Sideswipe mold. But it looks gorgeous in the proper G1 colors. And just think about it, this would have been the first proper redo of a Stunticon at the deluxe scale. It doesn't combine, there isn't a team to go with it, but it's still a good breakdown with a good transformation and a great color scheme. In 2014, it was time for Breakdown to enter the world of Creo. At this point, Creo was actually doing micro-changer combiners, and when they released their Menasor pack, Breakdown was amongst the team once more. Alongside that, you'd be able to get a Creon souvenir figure set in 2014 that included G2 Breakdown. I want you to consider where a lot of Transformers fans would have been in 2015. By this point, we had had a lot of combiner characters brought back in various ways. We'd had good figures of a lot of them, but we were still wanting proper combiners at mass retail. Enter Combiner Wars. I feel like a lot of people look back at this toy line with disdain nowadays, but in all honesty, it was one of the most popular Transformers lines up to that point, really. It brought new life to the Generations line. People were clamoring to get combiner pieces. I still remember the excitement people had online. Unfortunately, Menasor was probably the weakest combiner, and his lineup probably had the weakest deluxes. Breakdown here was arguably the worst figure in the entire line. But think about what that's saying. This is still a good-looking figure with a great transformation and a beautiful car mode, a good leg mode, a solid arm mode. The worst thing you could say about him is his lower body was really not up to snuff. His hips would constantly knock each other out of the way, making it very hard to play or pose with him. But at the same time, it's a decent figure. Later on in 2015, you could get the Unite Warriors breakdown, a beautifully painted redo of this figure released in Takara Tomy markets. 2016 would give us even more combining breakdowns. Going back to Creon for just a second, there was the Combiner Robot Mega Pack that would give you Superion, Bruticus, and Menasor all as a big gift set. We would see the Combiner Wars breakdown again, this time in his G2 colors alongside the rest of the Stunticons in the G2 Menasor gift pack. But the most interesting breakdown of the year would actually only be released in Japan, where you could get Zombie War Breakdown in the Unite Warriors Grand Galvatron set. So let me break this down for you. This combiner is made out of Marvel's Galvatron, G1 cartoon Ghost Starscream, Armada Thrust, a random roller that came out of nowhere, and Prime Breakdown. The one thing that all these characters have in common is they don't like Optimus Prime and are dead, I guess? Breakdown here is a beautiful figure. It's a redeco of Off-Road, but the mold actually does work for Breakdown. It doesn't have his hulking proportions, but the energy is there, and the truck mode looks perfect. In 2020, for the 10-year anniversary of Transformers Prime, here in the United States, we finally got War Breakdown, alongside the then Japanese exclusive Jet Viacon. In 2023, we'd get the most recent edition of G1 Breakdown in Legacy. This breakdown is essentially doing what the rest of the Stunticons are doing in Legacy. They're doing Combiner Wars again, but better. Unfortunately, Breakdown is once again using the worst mold out of the team. Even though he looks better than his fellow mold Wild Rider, this is still a rough transformation. The backpack is really unfortunate. The spoiler just hangs out on his arm. At the very least, Breakdown is going by on personality, and he's still a good figure at the end of the day. It's just a shame that him and Wild Rider aren't really matching up to the high standards set by the rest of the team. This figure was re-released the same year in the Stunticon Menasor gift set. To cap off 2023, Breakdown actually broke into a whole new universe, that being the earthspark cartoon. None of the other Stunticons made it, it was just our boy. And he received a one-step changer. Now, this is just a repaint of Wheeljack. He even still has the Wheeljack ears, but I really, really like this. The colors work, and he's a jackknife one-step, meaning that he has a good dynamic flip and change. That brings us to our most recent breakdown to date, that being the Legacy Prime Universe breakdown that was released in a 2-pack with Windsweeper on Amazon. So this is a retool of the original Legacy Prime Universe bulkhead. That bulkhead always got complaints. He's not round enough. He's too colorful. He doesn't really look like Bulkhead. Breakdown, though, I think he wears the mold better. Don't get me wrong, it still doesn't look like Prime Breakdown, but the colors are here. They're in the same places they should be. And at the end of the day, Breakdown has a lot more harsh angles in his Prime design. Bulkhead's supposed to look like a big, happy, fat guy. He has a belly like a beach ball. Meanwhile, Breakdown, he's supposed to have some of these harsh edges. It works for him. Add into that, you get a new hammer accessory alongside the gun and the shield that already looked great. It feels like this mold was designed as Breakdown first and then released as Bulkhead, which is weird because Bulkhead's been out for 3 years and we're just now getting Breakdown. And that's it. The thing about doing this video for Breakdown is it's made me realize that he has a bit of a split legacy, more so than anyone else we've looked at. Yes, to half the fandom, he is still that G1 coward, a part of Menasor who turns into the Lamborghini. But to the other half, he's that big bruiser with the soft center that we saw be best friends with Knockout. It's kind of crazy to think that there's such an even split down the middle in terms of toys released, media depictions, everything. But guys, I'll ask you, who's your favorite breakdown? Is there a breakdown that you're currently looking for? I am always happy to hear new suggestions for the show. Of course, we have a lot of characters to work through on my suggestion list, but we can always use even more thoughts for down the road. Just know it might be a little bit before we can get to them. Alongside that, guys, I just want to thank you so much for watching. I think our next video is probably going to be Diatlas. Don't quote me on that. I'm just thinking that. But in any case, have a good day, and we'll see what we get up to next time.